All right. We'll go ahead and get started, I guess. Okay. So like I said earlier, over the past, a couple of years, at least 3 or 4 people have asked me to do a teaching on tithing. And usually it's in conversation. There will be a situation that comes up and it's like, can I get your opinion on this specific thing? You know, like it's I don't know what to do as far as I'm attending a church or, whatever, and do I give 10% of my gross or 10% of my, net, or like how do we do it? And so I've been meaning to do a teaching on this for a while, and I was initially going to do it just kind of whenever we got together, just kind of the next available teaching opportunity, I guess back in January or whatever, and it ended up being like, well, why don't we just do this when there's a bigger group because more people have asked about it. And I don't like to record teachings when we're meeting in someone's home because I like to keep things anonymous and private, and so that in a more neutral setting like this, we can record a video. But so I'm going to do that now, and I'm calling this teaching "Tithing and the Forgotten Commandment," to put a little intrigue in there and kind of get you thinking, like, what's this forgotten commandment he's going to talk about? And I would say that the way I'm going to frame this is not as my goal isn't to go through a comprehensive, here's how you tithe, here's, all the ins and outs and the jot and tittles of it. And my goal is not to focus on that. We're going to touch on that to get started, but my goal is to provide a framework to think about tithing, because we don't have a tabernacle, we don't have a temple, we don't have a functioning Levitical priesthood, but tithing as a principle is still highly relevant. And I want to just kind of put something out there just kind of as a way to navigate it. So when we have these questions, how do I tithe? Let's start thinking of it in bigger scope than that. So I want to start off with just a basic definition, Strong's H4643. And I'm not great with Hebrew and Greek pronunciation, so I'm not even going to try. That's not my wheelhouse. The King James translates it in the following manner: tithe, 27 times, tenth part, and there's our key, tenth, and tithing. And so that Greek word for tithe literally means a tenth. And so when you're tithing, and this is where in modern times a lot of the churches will enforce a tithe of 10% of your income. And so like if you're a member of the local Baptist church or the local Methodist church or whatever church you're a member of, there may be expectations of whatever your income is, gross or net, depending on how it's interpreted, you need 10% of that. And there are reasons for that that we'll get into in a minute. It's not all like a money-making scam kind of thing, although it can be. Tithing is something that can have value. But I just want to give kind of a mention of it, just this whole 10th thing here, and then we'll kind of get into it in more detail. But we'll start off in Leviticus 27, towards the end of Leviticus. And just the last four verses there, 30 through 34. Actually, let's back up on verse 28, because he's talking about the valuation of animals, firstborn among animals. Nevertheless, if anything which a man sets apart to Yahweh, out of all that he has, of man or animal, or of the fields, or of his own property, shall not be sold or redeemed. Anything devoted to destruction is most holy to Yahweh. So that devoted destruction means if you set aside something sacrificially, once you've done that, you've crossed the proverbial Rubicon, you can't go back. Thus all the tithe, verse 29, no one who may have been set apart among men shall be ransomed, he shall surely be put to death. Thus all the tithe of the land, of the seed of Yahweh, or of the fruit, and that specific thing there, that's a whole big topic that we won't get into here, but thus all the tithe of the land, all the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree is Yahweh's, it is holy to Yahweh. And there's that word tithe, that's the tenth. So when you're setting aside a tenth of these things, it belongs to Yahweh. So I'm going to just ask a question. Does Yahweh need a tabernacle or a temple to exist? No. So right away, that kind of sets how we're going to frame this. If therefore a man wishes to redeem part of his tithe, he shall add 1/5 of it. For every 10th part of a herd or flock, whatever passes under the rod, the tenth one shall be holy to Yahweh. He is not to be concerned whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it, or if he does exchange it, then both it and its substitute shall become holy. It shall not be redeemed. These are the commandments which Yahweh commanded Moses for the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai. So we've got a principle here. This is not a first fruits kind of thing. Like with a first fruits kind of thing, you're getting the best. Yahweh wants every tenth, regardless of the condition. So there's that kind of idea. You have 9 sheep, and then that 10th one, regardless of its health, regardless of its condition, you set that one aside to Yahweh. And you do have an option here to redeem, and we see this come up sometimes. This is one of those things that we deal with in modern times. A lot of us are paycheck to paycheck, and so sometimes you might have something set aside for a tithe, but then you need to buy food. In certain cases like that, you do have the option to pull out of that tithe, but you have to pay back into it later plus a fifth. So this kind of sets up this whole idea of the holiness of the tithe. It's not just a side little fund. It's not one of Ramsey's envelopes that you just set aside and you're like, oh, I have an envelope for my car payment and an envelope for that nice shiny guitar that I want. Oh, here's one for Yahweh. It's like, that's not how it works. It's much, much different than that. Numbers 18 will be our next stop. We'll read the whole chapter. And we're just going to kind of set up what the Torah says about the idea of tithing specifically. And then we're going to broaden it out. Numbers 18. Excuse me. Okay. And this is kind of in regards to things that are offered to the Levites. So Yahweh said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's household with you shall bear the guilt in connection with the sanctuary. You and your sons with you shall bear the guilt in connection with your priesthood. But bring with you also your brothers, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may be joined with you and serve you, while you and your sons with you are before the tent of testimony. And they shall thus attend to your obligation and the obligation of all the tent, but they shall not come near to the furnishings of the sanctuary and the altar, or both they and you will die. They shall be joined with you and attend to the obligations of the tent of meeting for all the service of the tent, but an outsider may not come near you. There's that holiness idea, the set-apartness. So you shall attend to the obligations of the sanctuary and the obligations of the altar, so that there will no longer be wrath on the sons of Israel. Behold, I myself have taken your fellow Levites from among the sons of Israel. They are a gift to you, dedicated to Yahweh, to perform the service for the tent of meeting. But you and your sons with you shall attend to your priesthood for everything concerning the altar and inside the veil, and you are to perform service. I am giving you the priesthood as a bestowed service, but the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. So even the Levites are sort of like a tithe. He doesn't use the word tenth here, but they are set aside from all of Israel. They're kind of pulled out and given to Aaron and his sons basically as help. So it's almost like a fractal kind of thing. Whatever quantity Yahweh has, and it can be anything, it can be a people, it can be sheep, it can be money, whatever it is, there's a quantity. You can pull 10% out of that. You can pull whatever percent out of it. And even when you get a percentage out of that, we'll see later that the priests who are receiving the tithe, they also have to tithe. So a tenth of a tenth, whatever that ends up being with the actual amount that they're given. Verse 8, then Yahweh spoke to Aaron, now behold, I myself have given you charge of my offerings, even all the holy gifts of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you as a portion, and to your sons as a perpetual allotment. This shall be yours from the most holy gifts reserved from the fire. Every offering of theirs, every grain offering and every sin offering, every guilt offering, which they shall render to me, shall be most holy for you and for your sons. As the most holy gifts you shall eat, excuse me, every male shall eat it. It shall be holy to you. This also is yours, the offering of their gift, even all the wave offerings of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you and to your sons and daughters with you as a perpetual allotment. Every one of your household who is clean may eat of it. All the best of the fresh oil and all the best of the fresh wine and of the grain, the first fruits of those which they give to Yahweh, I give them to you. The first ripe fruits of all that is in their land, which they bring to Yahweh, shall be yours. Every one of your household who is clean may eat of it. Every devoted thing in Israel shall be yours. Every first issue of the womb of all flesh, whether man or animal, which they offer to Yahweh, shall be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn of any man you shall surely redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. As to their redemption price, from a month old you shall redeem them by your valuation, 5 shekels in silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. But the firstborn of an ox, or the firstborn of a sheep, the firstborn of a goat, you shall not redeem. They are holy. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar, and shall offer up their fat in smoke as an offering by fire for a soothing aroma to Yahweh. Their meat shall be yours. It shall be yours like the breast of a wave offering and like the right thigh. All the offerings of the holy gifts which the sons of Israel offer to Yahweh I have given to you and your sons and your daughters with you as a perpetual allotment. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before Yahweh to you and your descendants with you. Then Yahweh said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in their land, nor any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons of Israel. To the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe of Israel for an inheritance in return for their service which they perform, the service of the tent of meeting. And we're going to talk about this here in a little bit here. The Levites don't have inheritance. They don't have, quote unquote, real jobs like the rest of us do. This is their job. And this is why over in the Gospels, when Yahshua talks about the priests breaking the Sabbath, this is what he means. They're doing their day job. Like, I'm a truck driver. If I was to break the Sabbath in regards to my job, I'm out on the road delivering and picking up on Sabbath. That's my day job. Like, doing the work of the temple is their day job. They don't get Sabbath off. There are offerings to be made. There's work to be done. So this is their life. This is what they do. They don't have time to actually make a living elsewhere. Verse 22, the sons of Israel shall not come near the tent of meeting again, or they will bear sin and die. Only the Levites shall perform the service of the tent of meeting. They shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout all your generations, and among the sons of Israel they shall have no inheritance. For the tithe of the sons of Israel, which they offer as an offering to Yahweh, I have given to the Levites for an inheritance. Therefore I have said concerning them, they shall have no inheritance among the sons of Israel. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, moreover, you shall speak to the Levites and say to them, when you take from the sons of Israel the tithe which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall present an offering from it to Yahweh, a tithe of a tithe, a tenth of a tenth, literally. Your offering shall be reckoned to you as the grain from the threshing floor or the full produce from the wine vat. So you shall also present an offering to Yahweh from your tithes, which you receive from the sons of Israel. And from it you shall give Yahweh's offering to Aaron the priest. Out of all your gifts you shall present every offering due to Yahweh from all the best of them, the sacred part from them. You shall say to them, when you have offered from it the best of it, then the rest shall be reckoned to the Levites as the product of the threshing floor and as the product of the wine vat. You may eat it anywhere, you and your households, for it is your compensation in return for your service in the tent of meeting. You will bear no sin by reason of it when you have offered the best of it. But you shall not profane the sacred gifts of Yahweh of Israel, of the sons of Israel, or you will die. So this sets up here, you've got this priesthood, the Levites, the sons of Aaron, and they're doing holy work in a holy place, and they're doing it full time. They don't have a day job. They don't have time. They can't even inherit land. And I think that when you look at the problems of the world today, you know, we have this idea of the 1%. I know that's kind of a politically loaded term, but there is a group of people that have 1% of the world's wealth. You get to be in the 1% because you have dynastic land ownership. You have land that's been in your family's name for centuries, generations after generations. And so you're able to accumulate massive amounts of wealth that way if you're diligent with how you do it. And of course, we know that in this worldly system, money equals power. So the more assets you have, the more power you have. The more power you have, the more likely you are to abuse your power. Our politicians would never do that, would they? No, they wouldn't. So this is one of those things that Yahweh does, I think, to kind of keep that from happening. If we had a social order based on his Torah, where everything from top down, bottom up was centered around Yahweh's ways, everything would kind of shake out for the better. You're still going to have corruption. The human heart is wicked, who can know it, right? That's still going to be a problem. But you have things that in place that can bind that and put boundaries and put protections on society to keep that human heart from running too far amok. And this is one of those things. If you look at the Egyptians, you look at other ancient cultures, the priesthoods were basically like a form of royalty. It was almost like an oligarchy. You see in the Ten Commandments, we watched that movie with Charlton Heston, and the priests have all the grain in their granaries. And meanwhile, the people out there starving. And I love that line where the priest goes into Pharaoh and he's like, oh, they're taking all our grain. And Pharaoh looks at him and is like, you don't look any leaner, you know? The priests were abusing their privilege. They were riding high on the wealth of the land while people were starving. If you do these types of things that Yahweh says, you don't have a priesthood that can abuse people like that. The Levites here, the sons of Aaron, were on an even playing field with everybody else. But in this case, the tithe specifically was 10% from all of Israel given to the Levites. And he talks about this best language. So you're not just bringing what you have, you're supposed to bring the best to the Levites. And I think that is a kind of a way of, since they are kind of sort of like intermediaries or representatives of Yahweh, because that's the function of a priesthood, is to be kind of an in-between. It's kind of like bringing it to him, but he also allows them to share in it. So let's go to Deuteronomy 14. Deuteronomy 14. And we're not going to talk about the Feast of Unleavened Bread for quite a little bit here, but eventually towards the end we'll bring it around full circle. Deuteronomy 14, we're going to read verse 22 through 29. Deuteronomy 14, 22 through 29, through the end of the chapter. You shall surely tithe all the produce from what you sow, which comes out of the field every year. You shall eat in the presence of Yahweh your Elohim at the place where he chooses to establish his name, the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, the firstborn of your herd and your flock, so that you may learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim always. And so here's another principle of tithing. Fearing Yahweh or revering Yahweh. I like the word revere because you can fear anything, but reverence is a whole other thing. It has a fear built into it, but it's not just fear just because you're a scaredy cat or something. Verse 24, if the distance is so great for you that you are not able to bring the tithe, since the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to set his name is too far away from you, when Yahweh your Elohim blesses you, then you shall exchange it for money, and bind the money in your hand, and go to the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses. You may spend the money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, whatever your heart desires. And there you shall eat in the presence of Yahweh your Elohim and rejoice, you and your household. So this is the part where you realize after a while when you're kind of trying to do the stuff left of Matthew, there's not just one tithe. There's 2 or 3 tithes, depending on how you reckon it. So we just kind of talked about the tithe that all Israel pays, that initial 10%. Here he's talking about pretty much everybody I know calls this like the feast tithe. Some people will call it the Sukkot tithe or whatever, because when you're going camping for a week, that's not a cheap thing to do. You know, you've got to pay for the campground and you've got food and there's expenses. And if you're a young family that's just starting off, you've got to invest in camping equipment. And if you're an older, more established family, maybe you've got to invest in a camper, things like this. And so everybody I've known, and like I said, I'm not telling anyone how to tithe here. That's not my purpose. I'm just kind of trying to provide a framework, kind of explain some basic ways that people interpret these. And this is one of them, that in addition to your 10% that they would have tithed to the Levites, they would take another 10%, and mathematically, I've seen people say, you've got the whole, is it gross or is it net kind of thing? We'll get into that here in a minute. But you've also got the whole, if I take 10%, if I start off with $100,000 and I take 10% off of that, I've got $90,000 left. Do I take another 10% off of that 90, or do I take 20% off the 100, if that makes sense? So people, there's that debate, and I don't have an answer for that debate. But here, it doesn't specifically say this is for Sukkot. But the idea is that when you come down to Jerusalem, or at one point it would have been Shiloh, wherever Yahweh has his name, if it's too far for you to bring these things that you would offer, the animals, the livestock, the grain and such, you just sell them where you're at, take the money down, and when you're down there, you use that money to buy the stuff that's down there. And I think that this is probably, I don't know for sure, but just as a concept, this is probably where the whole money changing thing kind of, they were probably looking at this and being like, well, we could do something similar to that. But we know that by the time Yahshua came on the scene, the whole money changing thing was a heavy abuse that was a very corrupt system. But here you've got that same idea. You show up and you buy what you need instead of bringing it, 2 or 3 days journey with you. So this is one of those tithes, and this would be considered maybe the second tithe. Verse 27, you shall also not neglect the Levite who is in your town, for he has no portion or inheritance among you. The Levites, we forget about this sometimes, they weren't just all serving in the temple. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of Levites out there. Your average garden variety Levite was living out in the communities, and his job was to teach the Torah to the people. That was his job. And he doesn't have an inheritance. He can't own land. So he has to be able to feed himself, and if he has a family, he has to feed them. So it's this whole idea of if you're actually doing Yahweh's work, and it's the only thing you're doing, it has to come from somewhere. And so the community steps up and actually pitches in and helps these guys actually do the work. At the end of every third year, this would be what people generally call the third tithe, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year and shall deposit it in your town. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the stranger, the orphan, and the widow who are in your town shall come and eat and be satisfied, in order that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. So these are the three basic tithes. The main tithe, the feast tithe, or Sukkot tithe, or however you want to frame it, and then the every third year tithe for the poor, the orphans, and such as that. And we're going to see as we kind of go through here, we tend to, this is kind of a strange analogy, but if you think about someone's face, you see somebody's face, you recognize them. And even as that person gets older, even if you haven't seen a person in 10, 15 years, you see their face, it's changed, but you still recognize that person. You're not doing it because you're micro-analyzing their eyelashes and the exact shade of the salt and pepper in their beard and their chin's square and the distance between their eyes. You're not doing any of that. You're seeing the whole face as it is. And everything else is just based on that. You're not even, and I think that this is where the whole tithing thing is one of those things where instead of just seeing the face, seeing the whole and just letting it be what it is, we tend to hyper-focus in on the details. A tenth of what? Is it gross or is it net? When do I do it? Do I have to give it to this person? Do I not give it to this person? And I think that by hyper-focusing in on the minutia, even though the minutia are relevant, there is importance, I think we miss the overall point of the tithing. And it's kind of like the whole calendar debate. Like my position on the calendar is the calendar liturgically is to get Yahweh's people before him at the same time. One people, one place, one time. That's the purpose. But if we get so bogged down in the details of how the calendar works, you don't have one people, one place, one time. You've got a whole bunch of scattered, like we're missing the point. The calendar is important and we want to be right. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be right, but we don't want to miss the beautiful face of Yahweh because we're focusing on his eyebrows, okay? So that's kind of where I'm going with this. Let's look at the big picture here, but we are going to talk about some of the details here. So those are your three basic tithes. And does anybody, show of hands, does anybody do the third year tithe? I see some hands. I don't see many hands. And I'm wondering if that's because I don't know if there's a lack of understanding on it. Like, how do we do it? Like, we don't have a tabernacle to send it to. He talks about, like, take it to your depository in your town. Like, there's not just some place we can take our tithe wherever we live and say, here's the tithe. Like, they would look at us like we had two heads. Like, what are you talking about? That's why we have banks, right? You don't just take your money, anyway, they'll take your money. The bank will always take your money. They'll never say no, but anyway. So, and let's go to Deuteronomy 26. We'll read a few verses here. Actually, we'll read the whole chapter, Deuteronomy 26. And this is in regards to first fruits. Deuteronomy 26. Then it shall be when you enter the land which Yahweh your Elohim gives you as an inheritance, and you shall possess it and live in it, you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground which you bring in from your land, that Yahweh your Elohim gives you, and you shall put it in a basket, and go to the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to establish his name. The same idea as we read before. You shall go to the priest who is in office at that time and say to him, I declare this day Yahweh my Elohim, that I have entered the land which Yahweh swore to our fathers to give us. So this would be, I think, the very first time they entered the land, because you're not entering the land every year. They entered the land once. But anyway, there's a principle here. The priest shall take from the basket from your hand and set it down before the altar of Yahweh your Elohim. You shall answer and say before Yahweh your Elohim, my father was a wandering Aramaean, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number. But there he became a great, mighty, and populous nation. The Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us and imposed hard labor on us. Then we cried to Yahweh, the Elohim of our fathers, and Yahweh heard our voice and saw our affliction and our toil and our oppression. Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with great terror and with signs and wonders. Isn't that kind of what we're celebrating this week? And just as a side note, the Exodus as a theme is the most repeated thing in the whole scriptures. It's everywhere. It's like if you think about a human body that's got nerves all through it, they start at the brain and they work through your spine and they go out to that's the Exodus. It's the backbone of the whole scripture. Thematically, it's everywhere. Even if it's not spelled out, it's there. He has brought us into this place and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 10. Now behold, I have brought the first of the produce of the ground, which you, O Yahweh, have given me. You shall set it down before Yahweh your Elohim and worship before Yahweh your Elohim. You and the Levite and the stranger who is among you shall rejoice in all the good which Yahweh your Elohim has given you and your household. When you have finished paying all the tithe of your increase in the third year, so there's that third year tithe again, the year of tithing, then you shall give it to the Levite, to the stranger, or to the orphan, and to the widow, that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Now, I just want to pause right there. There's always this debate on, do I give it off of the my gross income, or do I give it off of my net, your take-home pay? But there's a side thing. If somebody is so poor that they don't have an increase, literally all the money that they make is spent on rent and groceries and food, they have no excess. I think that that's something to consider too. And as we go through this, we're going to see this idea of there's an economy here that Yahweh has built in his word. He doesn't want any poor amongst us. So if somebody is poor, it's because something is not right in the community. And it could be because of their own bad habits. But I know poor people that can literally barely afford just to keep shelter. And they're still tithing 20, 30, 40% to ministries that don't need their money. And they're doing it from a place of, I think that they have a good heart about it, they're sincere, but I think that they're misunderstanding this. Because if that's the case, if you can't even feed yourself and you're tithing, you are always dependent on the kindness of others. You are always going to be dependent on other people supplying your needs. And I think that that's where, if we consider the tithe 10% on your gross or your net, however, if you have an increase, that's kind of another layer. Because the people that have an increase can afford to tithe without suffering any kind of starvation or rent coming due or anything like that. And if it's done within a community and it's done properly, the people that are paycheck to paycheck and don't have an increase can maybe get their head above water to eventually they do have an increase again. And the idea, I think, is for everybody in the community to have an increase. And it just kind of snowballs and builds. But if we don't do things, with that idea, we're always going to have the poor in our land. But we'll read about that here in a minute. Okay, so where was I? I was in verse 13. You shall say before Yahweh your Elohim, I have removed the sacred portion from my house, and also have given it to the Levite and the stranger, the orphan and the widow, according to all your commandments which you have commanded me. I have not transgressed or forgotten any of your commandments. And he calls the tithe a sacred portion. That's the thing. Like, we tend to think of just, it's money. Like, yeah, it is. It can be money, but whatever it is, tithe, of your livestock, money, whatever it is, it's sacred. And when something is sacred, it's off limits. There's a boundary between you and it. Once something goes in the tithe bucket, it's in the tithe bucket. Okay, verse 14, I have not eaten of it while mourning, nor have I removed any of it while I was unclean, nor offered any of it to the dead. I have listened to the voice of Yahweh my Elohim. I have done according to all that you have commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel and the ground which you have given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as you swore to our fathers. This day Yahweh your Elohim commands you to do these statutes and ordinances. You shall therefore be careful to do them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have today declared Yahweh to be your Elohim, and that you would walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his ordinances, and listen to his voice. Yahweh has today declared to you to be his people, a treasured possession, as he promised you, and that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above the nations which he has made, for praise, fame, and honor, and that you shall be a consecrated people to Yahweh your Elohim, as he has spoken. And so he's connecting the idea of this tithing here with keeping all his commandments. And when I talk about the forgotten commandment that we're going to come to here in a little bit, if you look at Yahweh's Torah as a system, as a framework for society, it should be scalable from the family level all the way up to a community, a town, an assembly, a nation. In our case, we have fun scaling it up to the nation. I don't see that happening. I wish it could, but families, assemblies, communities, even within reason, I think that that's something that's possible. And when we allow it to be the framework, tithing is part of that. But he couples it in here, I think, because when people are not struggling so much in the flesh, it does make it easier to obey Yahweh. When you're struggling in the flesh, just trying to figure out what to eat or how to pay next month's rent, your focus is on that. And you kind of run the risk of like the parable of the soils, getting choked out by the thistles and things of the world, So the more pressure you can take off of somebody by helping to ease their load, the easier it makes it for them to actually hunker down and keep Yahweh's commandments. It doesn't guarantee that they'll be successful because we have that whole heart thing we talked about, but in principle, it should make it at least a little easier and a little bit smoother because it's one less thing to worry about. Now, with holy convocations, we're here doing one of these. I'm just going to briefly mention this. This is kind of one of those things that it can be controversial, but it shouldn't be controversial. When you have a holy convocation for the weekly Sabbath and for the high days like today, those are commanded. And you're supposed to get together in a place and, have a set-aside place and time for Yahweh. And that takes resources. So whether you're meeting in a home, if you're meeting in a home, there's food, there's paper plates, there's things like that. There's always something that's needed in order to facilitate the holy convocation. If you scale that up with a bigger group, like we'll talk about here in a minute, then like here, there's electricity, there's propane in these heaters, there's things like this, and it all costs some kind of money. So it's one of those things where I'm not an advocate of like the mainstream church model where like everybody has to tithe 20% or 10% if you're a member and all this kind of stuff, and they shame and guilt you. But the lights have to stay on somehow. There has to be some kind of something to kind of facilitate the convocation. And if we want to get together in bigger and bigger groups, which helps us bear our burdens, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, then the need for resources grows. And so it's just something to consider because we tend to think of when we come out of the mainstream and we see their abuses of tithing and we see Joel Osteen with his Lamborghinis and all this kind of stuff, like we tend to think, oh, that's definitely a major abuse. But at the same time, if you just need something to keep the lights on or to warm the room or a place to meet in the summer that's air conditioned or a place that's handicap accessible so more people can come, that does take money. And so just something to consider. I won't harp on it too much because then I'll look like Joel Osteen, and I don't want to look like Joel Osteen. I'd like to keep my beard, thank you. So let's talk about alms and charity. Alms and charity. It's Strong's G1654. I won't even try to pronounce it. This comes up a few times in the New Testament. The King James translates it as alms, alms deeds, which is kind of an old-timey word. Nobody says alms deeds anymore. And it's basically the idea of just giving. And so I kind of want to start we talked about some of the details, some of the minutia of tithing. I want to start pulling us back to the bigger picture. We're going to zoom out now. Let's go to Matthew 6. Matthew 6, we're going to read verses 1 through 8. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Now, I remember as a child, I'm going to be diplomatic here, I remember that there were people in church that were well off. And I remember they passed the money plate around. There's cash in it sometimes, and sometimes there's checks in it. And of course, with a check, you get to see who wrote the check. And almost without fail, people who were kind of more showy and kind of wanted you to know that they had money, instead of putting cash in, they would put a check. And my suspicion was always, why didn't they just put cash in there? You know, it's like, if you put a check in, it's like, oh, you can see, I put in $200. Look at me, I'm so good. I'm such a great giver, you know? And maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's, putting something on somebody that doesn't deserve to be there. But I think that there kind of is a danger of that. Like if somebody has the means to give, if you can do it as anonymously as possible, I think that that's the best way to go. Because even if you start off with good intentions, like after a while, somebody's going to come up to you and say, hey, I've noticed that every week you put in $200. That's great. And after a while, maybe pride kicks in, you start to puff up, and then, who knows. But I think Joshua is clearly trying to get us to avoid this kind of behavior. Verse 3, when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you pray, you're not to be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners so that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you're praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. So do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And that's kind of a key thing. He knows what we need before we ask him. And people have told stories over the years. It hasn't happened to me, but I've heard probably at least 8 or 9 people in the past 3 years that I can remember here talk about stories of, they just had this hunch to go offer somebody $20. I remember somebody told me they were at a Wendy's, just a random thing. They were at a Wendy's and they had this instinct, go buy a gallon of milk and give it to that guy. Like, that's the most random thing you can think of. And so the person did it, and they went up to the person and was like, I'm supposed to give you a gallon of milk. And the person was like, oh my gosh, how did you know? Like, they had a baby at home and they couldn't afford formula, and the mom had issues. And so they were desperate to feed the baby. Like things like this. He knows what we need. And if we allow ourselves to be the means of provision, people like that get taken care of. And so, but if we're focusing on 10% of what, 10% of who, what do we give? We miss opportunities like that. Let's go to Acts chapter 10. We're going to read about Cornelius. Acts chapter 10, we're going to read verses 10 through 33. Is that right? Yeah, the whole thing. Okay, yeah. So we're going to read about how we can eat anything we want to. This is Peter's sheet vision. Oh, wait, no, we're not. We're not going to read about that. That's not the point here. Starting in verse 10. He became hungry, and this is Peter, was desiring to eat, but while they were making preparations, he fell into a trance. And he saw the sky opened up, and an object like a great sheet coming down, lowered by 4 corners to the ground. And there were in it all kinds of 4-footed animals and crawling creatures of the earth and birds of the air. A voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Master, for I've never eaten anything unholy and unclean." This is at least 10 years after Calvary. He obviously didn't read Galatians. He didn't read Romans. Like, poor Peter, he had no idea that he was out from under the law. He had no idea that Christ declared everything clean. Again, a voice came to him a second time. What Elohim has cleansed, no longer consider unholy. This happened 3 times, and immediately the object was taken up into the sky. Now, while Peter was greatly perplexed in mind as to what the vision which he had seen might be, behold, the men who had been sent by Cornelius, having asked directions for Simon's house, appeared at the gate. Calling out, they were asking whether Simon, who was also called Peter, was staying there. Wait a second here. Just a second here. I think I should have backed up. Oh, no, we're good. We're good. I'll keep going. Behold, where was I? Verse 19, thank you. While Peter was reflecting on the vision, I thought maybe I skipped a part, but I didn't. The Spirit of Yahweh said to him, behold, 3 men are looking for you. But get up, go downstairs, and accompany them without misgivings, for I have sent them myself. Peter went down to the men and said, behold, I am the one who you are looking for. What is the reason for which you've come? They said, Cornelius, a centurion, a righteous and Elohim-fearing man, well spoken of by the entire nation of the Jews, was divinely directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and hear a message from you. So he invited them in and gave them lodging. On the next day he got up and went away with them, and some of the brethren from Joppa accompanied him. On the following day he entered Caesarea. Now Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. This is kind of a big deal. When Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet and worshipped. But Peter raised him up, saying, stand up, I too am just a man. As he talked with him, he entered and found many people assembled. And he said to them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a man who is a Jew to associate with a foreigner or to visit him. And yet Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man unholy or unclean. That is why I came without even raising any objection when I was sent for. So I ask what reason you have sent for me. By the time we get over to Galatians, when Paul talks about it, Peter had apparently forgotten this because he's all of a sudden withdrawing. He's not eating with the Gentiles anymore, and he kind of lost sight of this, I think. Cornelius said, 4 days ago to this hour I was praying in my house during the 9th hour, and behold, a man stood before me in shining garments. And he said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms have been remembered before Yahweh. That's that word. Therefore, send to Joppa and invite Simon, who is also called Peter, to come to you. He's staying at the house of Simon, the tanner by the sea. So I sent for you immediately, and you have been kind enough to come. Now then, we are all here present before Elohim to hear all that you have been commanded by the Master. So here's this Gentile, Cornelius, and something about his walk, we don't have a lot of details. It says he was God-fearing, so there's something there. He's well respected by the Jews. So something he's doing is causing the Jews to actually like the guy. If he was out there preaching, like we're told, because he's considered the first Gentile convert, if Peter and all these guys, and if they were all out there, hey, don't keep the Torah, that's just for the Jews, do we think that the Jews would be liking the guy? Like, no, that was one of the things. Like, they wanted to stone Stephen because one of the accusations was he was teaching against the Torah. It was one of the accusations they made against Joshua. They made that same thing against Paul. If you're out there preaching, don't keep the Torah, Jews generally don't like you. And it's like that today. And I get it. We should be keeping the Torah. They know the Bible left of Matthew. But Yahweh noticed his alms. He noticed his charity. And so this is somebody that Peter, up until this moment, wouldn't even be caught dead in his house. This lowly Gentile, this dog, they called him, because even the dogs can eat the crumbs from the table, right? Even this guy got Yahweh's attention. And it wasn't because he was keeping Torah perfectly. He wasn't even like a believer yet in the normal sense. He was just beginning that journey. But his alms, his charity stood out. Like, I wish my charity would stand out to Yahweh. I'm not there. I've never had any indication that Yahweh's like, wow, James, you're crushing it in the charity department. Good job. Like that would be fantastic. Hasn't happened. So maybe it has for some people. It hasn't happened for me. So this is kind of a big deal. We'll go back into Matthew 25. Matthew 25. and we're going to read verses 14 through 46, so a decent little chunk here. Matthew 25, 14 through 46, which I believe is the end of the chapter, yeah. So this is talking about the parable of the talents. And this is where English can kind of be a blessing and kind of be a curse when it comes to reading our Bible. When I was taught this growing up, it was framed in terms of gifts, things you're good at. Oh, you're a talented person in this way. So if you're a talented cook, you by cooking meals for the church. And if you're a talented singer, you give by singing songs for the church and all this kind of stuff. That's what it was. We know that talents was a form of currency back then. It was a certain amount of gold or silver, whatever. So it kind of pulls weight both ways. A talent, a gift, can be used as a form of currency because it's time, it's skill, it's things like this. You can give that just as easily as you can give money or livestock. So there is some interchangeability here because of the English, but we're going to focus on the money part of it here because I think that's what he intended. For it is just like a man about to go on a journey who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. So the one who gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his own ability. That's important. And he went on his journey. Immediately the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who had received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I've gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Also, the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. The one who also had received the 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid, and I went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. But his master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, and in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, did I want to read the whole thing there? Yeah, let's do it. Okay. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. Now, this is important. Who is he bringing before him? He's bringing the nations. He's not bringing only Israelites. He's not bringing only Christians. He's bringing everybody before him at this point, based on what it says here. All the nations will be gathered before him. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison. You came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Master, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? The king will answer and say to them, Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them you did to me. Then he will also say to those on his left, Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they themselves also will answer, Master, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you? Then he will answer them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of these, the least of these, you did it not to me. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. And I think of Cornelius here, because Cornelius was from the nations. He was a Gentile. And he meets this criteria. He was doing these things. He's not thinking, I'm doing these things because I'm Jewish, because he wasn't Jewish. He wasn't thinking, oh, I'm doing these things because I need to do the letter of the law. He probably wasn't thinking that way. So I think he falls into this category. And I think at this point in the age where we're all so mixed up ethnically, anybody can fall into this category. And so he's looking at what do we do when we aim our resources at other people. Do we see people who need and withhold, or do we see people who need and give? And he doesn't talk about how righteous they are by the law here. I'm pro-Torah. But he doesn't list that as a criteria here for judging these people. It's how they help their neighbor. It's how they fulfill that second commandment by loving their neighbor as themselves. So now we're going to take this back and we're going to relate it back to the forgotten commandment. Well, let's go to Deuteronomy. We're going to go back there, Deuteronomy 15. So in all that talk of Cornelius and his almsgiving, and when you're giving to the poor, don't go out and tell everybody you're giving to the poor, and then you've got all these people who are just regular people who are doing good things by helping the people around them. There's no mention of a 10%. There's no mention of gross or net or any of these things, the minutia that we talked about earlier. There's no mention of the third year. There's no mention of Levites. All that stuff is completely absent from what we're talking about here. And this is where I think that, we don't live back then. It's easy to want to we can live the Bible to an extent, but we can only live it so far. These are one of those things, if we're going to tithe accurately, we can't really do it accurately. We don't live in a system that allows that. But we do live in a system like those nations that were brought before the Master who can give to those who need it. Temple or not, Levites or not, that can always be done. Deuteronomy 15, we'll read verses 1 through 18. We're getting close to the end here. This is talking about the Sabbath year. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a remission of debts. This is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall release what he has loaned to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother, because Yahweh's remission has been proclaimed. From a foreigner you may exact it, but your hand shall release whatever of yours is with your brother. However, there will be no poor among you, since Yahweh will surely bless you in the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance to possess. If only you listen obediently to the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to observe carefully all this commandment which I'm commanding you today. So if we want to eradicate poverty, what do we need to do? Yeah, the year of release. And more broadly, we need to obey Yahweh. He didn't mention it here, but there's verse after verse after chapter where he's talking about, if you obey my commandments, I'll bless you. If you obey my commandments, I'll bless you. He says it over and over and over again. And if he's blessing his people as a whole unit, there shouldn't be any poor among us. But let's keep going, though. Verse 6, for Yahweh your Elohim will bless you as he has promised you, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. You will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. If there is a poor man with you, now we're starting to slip a little bit because he knows our hearts. One of your brothers in any of your towns in the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother. But you will freely open your hand to him, and shall generously lend him sufficient for his need in whatever he lacks. So if he needs more than 10%, give him more than 10%. Don't just say, well, I've already tithed my 10% to the poor. Sorry. Give him what he needs if you're still able to. Verse 9, beware that there is no base thought in your heart saying, the 7th year, the year of remission is near, and your eye is hostile toward your poor brother, and you give him nothing. Then he may cry to Yahweh against you, and it will be a sin in you. So this is kind of the opposite of Cornelius. Cornelius' generosity rose up to Yahweh as a blessing. These people here that aren't giving, The cries of their poor brothers are rising up to Yahweh. We don't want this at all. This is not good. Verse 10, you shall generously give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give it to him, because for this thing Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in all your work and in all your undertakings. For the poor will never cease to be in the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your needy and the poor in your land. If your kinsman, a Hebrew man or woman, is sold to you, then he shall serve you 6 years, but in the 7th year you will set him free. When you set him free, you shall not send him away empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally from your flock and from your threshing floor and from your wine vat. You shall give to him as Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you. Notice how he's not putting a limit on this. He's not putting a percentage. He's saying liberally. Really bless these people. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yahweh your Elohim redeemed you. Therefore I command you this today. It shall come about if he says to you, I will not go out from you, because he loves you and your household, since he fares well with you. Then you will take an awl and pierce it through his ear into the door, and he will be your servant forever. Also you shall do likewise to your maidservant. It shall not seem hard to you when you set him free, for he has given you 6 years with double the service of a hired man. So Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in whatever you do. So I mentioned earlier the idea that when we have the Levitical system that can't own property, that's a way of keeping like an oligarchy from coming into play. That's a way from keeping wealth being built up to the point where it can be abused. This is kind of that same thing. When we look at the American South, you had this generational wealth. You had people with hundreds, if not thousands, of slaves. And those slaves are wealth generators. And the more wealth you have, the more you can invest, the more slaves you can buy. It becomes this big thing. And people, like I said earlier, people with that kind of money also have power that goes with it, often political. And so what we see is if you have people with corrupt hearts getting into those positions of money making and power, the society itself gets corrupted. The whole thing comes down. And what we have here is Yahweh putting the brakes on that. Nobody can accumulate more than 6 years worth of work off of a person that's considered a slave. And then they've got to let them go. And not only that, the past 6 years, they've had lodging, they've had food. The master better have been treating them well. When this is done, not only that, he's got to send them away loaded. They're not going out with empty hands. And this is not considered a tithe. What we talked about earlier in Deuteronomy doesn't talk about this. So you've got a society where if you happen to have somebody in your house who you're releasing in that 7th year, not only are you doing your normal tithing, but now you've got to do this. And if his household is going out with him, you've got to send enough to provide for his household. So you can only do that if you have an increase, A, and you can only do that if the society around you is set up to where economically it can handle that. So let's go over to Deuteronomy 16, next chapter. We're just going to read verses 1 through 17. We're almost done. Observe the month of Abib and celebrate the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim, which we did. For in the month of Abib, Yahweh your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night. You shall sacrifice the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim from the flock and the herd in the place where Yahweh chooses to establish his name. You shall not eat leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat with it unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, so that you may remember all the days of your life, the day when you came out of the land of Egypt. For 7 days no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory, and none of the flesh which you sacrifice on the evening of the first day shall remain overnight until morning. You are not allowed to sacrifice the Passover in any of your towns which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. But at the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to establish his name, you shall sacrifice the Passover in the evening at sunset, at the time that you came out of Egypt. You shall cook and eat it in the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses. In the morning you are to return to your tents. 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a solemn assembly to Yahweh your Elohim, which is why we're all here, and you shall do no work on it. You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. You shall begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Is everybody counting the omer? We're all counting the omer? That is a commandment. It's not necessarily a forgotten commandment, but it's a commandment that a lot of people kind of lose track of. Then you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks to Yahweh your Elohim with a tribute of a free will offering of your hand, which you shall give just as Yahweh your Elohim blesses you. So you're giving a free will offering as he blessed you. There's no percentage here. If he blesses you more, that free will offering needs to be more. If he blesses you less, that free will offering will be less. You shall remember, let's back up here. Verse 11, you shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim, you and your son and your daughter, and your male and your female servants, and the Levite who is in your town, and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are in your midst, and in the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to establish his name. Now, the Levite, the orphan, the widow, these are people that were told to give a tithe to every third year. So can these people come before Yahweh and rejoice if they're destitute and impoverished, starving, no place to live? That's going to be really difficult. And even if they were able to show up and make it work, are they going to be able to rejoice if they've got the weight of that hanging over their heads? So if we want our brothers and sisters to all be able to rejoice before Yahweh, we need to do what we can to enable that. Verse 12, you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt. You shall be careful to observe these statutes. You shall celebrate the Feast of Booths 7 days after you have gathered in from your threshing floor and your wine vat. And you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male and female servants, and the Levite and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are in your towns. 7 days you shall celebrate a feast to Yahweh your Elohim in the place which Yahweh chooses, because Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands. All the work of your hands. So we're not talking with the tithe going to the Levites. It was specifically centered around livestock and food. There also were financial tithes, things like that, but it was largely stuff that they could eat. In this case, he's talking about all the work of your hands. So if you're a blacksmith, you're doing stuff with your hands. That's your job. There's ways that you can bless the community. Okay, verse 16. 3 times in a year, all your males shall appear before Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and at the Feast of Booths, and they shall not appear before Yahweh empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of Yahweh your Elohim, which he has given you. And this is what I'm calling the forgotten commandment. It's this come to the feasts, not with empty hands. It's a commandment. We are forbidden to come to Yahweh's holy days, these 3 times a year, empty-handed. But he also says to bring as you're able. If you're less able, bring less. If you're more able, bring more. But it is a commandment. And this is where, as a framework for tithing, I think instead of focusing on the details, we focus on the reason why tithing is needed. Tithing is needed to prop up the community. And the community has multiple aspects. It has people that are poor. It has people who, if you're in a situation where you've got like a larger assembly, maybe you've got somebody who preaches full time, like a Levite used to do. They got to eat. Maybe you could go that way. You know, there's different places where it could go. There's a thing called the Dunbar number. I don't know if anybody's heard me talk about this, but there was I forget if I think he was an anthropologist, and I think back in the 90s, he came up with this idea that when you look historically, when you have communities of different sizes, the ones that there was a threshold of around 150 people, give or take, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, around 150. When you're around that number, you've got enough people in the community to where somebody's struggling, people can pick up the slack. Somebody's behind in modern times, if somebody's behind on their rent, the community, there's enough people in the community to where everybody can give $20 or whatever and help that person out without being undue, burdened themselves. You can spread the load when you've got about 150 people. And it's a small enough number to where you know everybody, the families are closer, and it's just a tight-knit community that's big enough to self-sustain. When you get bigger than that, now you have a more cumbersome form of government needed. Now you need stricter rules and all this stuff to manage, and then stuff starts to get cumbersome. Then you start to get you're more likely to have corruption and abuses of power and all this. If you get too small, when somebody struggles, there's not enough within the group to support them. If you've got a community of 3 families and they're all poor, When one of them is on hard times, who's going to come in? Like there's nothing there. But if you've got a bigger community, there's more resources in the community to help that person out. So where I'm going with this is, if we aim to have a community, this is just my position, my opinion, if we aim to have a community, we need to aim to have somewhere around this number. And I look around when we get together here, we've had times here in this room where we've had probably a couple hundred people, like in the summer, like on nice days, on the high days and such. And during the feasts, there's people everywhere. And so if all of those people were to find some way to actually become a community, instead of people that just bump into each other from time to time, actually get into life together. If we could achieve this Dunbar number kind of thing, it helps us to make sure that nobody shows up empty-handed. That's my whole point here with tithing. Instead of thinking about tithing as numbers and dollar signs and percentages and all this, think of it as, what can I do to make sure that my neighbor doesn't show up to the holy days empty-handed? What do we do to make sure that everybody in the community has something to bring when they come before Yahweh? If we simplify it to that, and that's why I say this is the forgotten commandment. Like, I hardly ever think about it. Don't come empty-handed. That's a negative command. It's a shall not. You shall not come empty-handed, which means you shall come with something in your hands, something to give. And I think that that's kind of the whole point here. We'll close here just real quick with Galatians 6. I do read from Galatians. Galatians 6, we'll read 1 through 10. Brethren and sisterin, even if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, so that you too will not be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Messiah. For if anyone thinks he is something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But each one must examine his own work. Then he will have reason for boasting in regard for himself alone and not in regard to another. For each one will bear his own load. The one who is taught the word is to share all good things with the one who teaches him. Do not be deceived. Elohim is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this will he reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from his flesh reap corruption. The one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who are of the household of faith. So to me, this is the whole thing here. Tithing, don't think of it in tithing. Don't think of it in terms of, like the numbers. Think of it in terms of like the purpose. Making sure that if I've got an increase, if I myself don't need, like if I'm a poor person, if I'm a widow, if I'm an orphan, if I'm in that category where people need to send me tithe money, in my opinion, that person doesn't have an increase. There's nothing to really tithe. If they get to a point to where they do have an increase, that whole pay it forward idea, they can put it back into the community. There's always going to be somebody poor in the community. But if the community is conscious of this and has this idea of let's keep everybody's hands full, then the community rises. We have fewer and fewer poor in the community. And hopefully we have more and more righteousness in the community, because we know that in Yahweh's system, the one who has the least will be given the most. The least will be greatest and vice versa. And so if we look at the poor among us as the best among us, and we honor them accordingly with our resources, the whole thing goes up. The water comes up under the ship gets higher and higher and higher. There we go. So Levites and paid preachers, I'm just going to pause on this because it is kind of controversial. We see a move in modern times. I see it on YouTube a lot. You'll have some Torah teacher that comes along and claims to be a Levite. Can't prove it. There's no documentation. It's just, I'm a Levite, trust me, bro. And almost always they want you to tithe to them. And how convenient. How convenient that somebody would be a Levite. And, in my experience, this is not going to apply to everybody. There's always exceptions. The ones that I've seen are people that just want to stay home on their computer all day and teach everybody what they know, which is everything. And they want that to be their job, and they want you to tithe to them because they're special. I don't buy into that. If a person is, like I said, if you've got a group somewhere around that Dunbar number and you are able to, as a group, support somebody who teaches and ministers full time, I don't personally have a problem with tithe money going to that person if that's all they're doing. If that person has a day job and is providing for their family and is doing fine, in my opinion, they don't need your tithe money personally. Maybe put it into to the assembly, the building, whatever, but I don't personally see the need to pay that person. So these are things to consider. I mean, if you're looking at paying a ministry, does the preacher do it full time? Whatever, there's things like that. If the person's saying they're a Levite, they're probably not. They're probably just trying to find a way to get money. If there are legit Levites out there, that's great, but there's no temple or tabernacle for them to serve in, so they're just like the rest of us in that regard. There are ministries. We know some that are doing good work. I just lost the name of it. Mercy Run. Yeah, I mean, there's several ministries here locally that are doing good work, good, solid work, that if you have tithe money, they'd be happy to have it, and we can trust them to put it to good use. And, it doesn't have to be 10%. It can be 9% or 8% or whatever you can spare. It can be 20%. But the point is that if we build it in towards community and the community comes up, everybody in the community is blessed, and hopefully, if the community itself has an increase, we can start going outside the community because people have a heart for outreach. You can't have outreach if you don't have the means to outreach. Everything takes resources. It's like if we were to have this big outreach ministry right now and start bringing people in, it's like, where are we going to put them? Like space is a thing. There's all these kinds of things that need to be done if we're going to do the work of the kingdom. And sadly, in this world, it does require some type of money. It's not like the old days. I mean, here where we're at in Pennsylvania, maybe you could get away with this, just giving somebody a sheep or a goat for payment. But generally speaking, it takes money. So make sure your neighbor doesn't have empty hands when they come to the feast. Make sure your neighbor isn't poor if it's within your power. And if you can, do your best to not be that poor person that needs to collect tithe money. Sometimes we get in situations where we're just, none of us like to work, unless there's one guy that just has this awesome job that you love waking up to go to, but it's like, I know people that would rather just sit around and be spiritual than provide their families. In my opinion, yeah, you're putting yourself in a situation where you need tithe money unnecessarily. If you can work, if you can provide, you should, and then that goes back into the community. But I'm going to close it with that. Hopefully that was helpful. Like I said, my goal wasn't to explain tithing. My goal wasn't to teach you tithing. It wasn't to make a firm position and say, this is how to do it, and this is the only way to do it. I'm trying to reframe the issue in a way that's actually useful and beneficial to us in 2026 America and beyond, in a way that we can actually do without a lot of headache. So I'll open the floor at this point for questions, comments, and strong opinions.